Like in a fairy tale, we've managed to dress up and over-romanticize the birth of Christ. We've unconsciously transported the biblical text into our own culture now. And that is why I want to take a few minutes to cover ways in which my views on the birth of Jesus used to be entirely wrong, and your might as well, because here's what's awesome. Not only will some of these differences just blow your mind, but the true understanding actually transforms the Christmas story from this fairy tale we've created into something even better. But first, let me just say, welcome to the video. If you're new to the channel, my name is Chris, and this channel is really all about trying to clarify the real Christ according to the Bible. So we're gonna pick up this story with these two, Joseph and Mary. And this is really where the story begins. And we're gonna start in Luke chapter 1, verse 26 and 27. And it says, the angel Gabriel was sent from God to a city of Galilee named Nazareth, to a virgin betrothed to a man whose name was Joseph, of the house of David, and the virgin's name was Mary. All right, so right away, there's actually a lot we can unpack from these first two verses that we don't even realize. And really, we're gonna start with Nazareth, because if you've heard the Christmas story, you've read the Bible, you've probably heard of the town of Nazareth, and that's where Joseph and Mary are from. But the town of Nazareth is actually just this small village kind of set into a hillside with a population of only around 200 people. And on top of that, it was a really poor town. To just kind of like put the icing on the cake, it was despised by the rest of Judah. Like, nobody liked this poor little nothing town set into the hillside outside of the city of Galilee. So that just kind of helps you understand in reality where these two poor individuals are coming from. And then when we look and we see the word betrothed, and most people have come to understand that that means they're either engaged or married. And it's kind of both, right? Like in our culture, like, I love you, you love me, I get down on one knee, I give you this beautiful diamond ring, you say yes, and then we go live this fairy tale wedding. Really what's happening with Joseph and Mary is their family sat down and they had some negotiations and made a contract. And once that contract was completed and both sides were happy, Mary now belonged or was betrothed to Joseph. And at that point, they're married. Sort of. And they're married in the sense that if they wanted to split up for whatever reason, they would actually have to get a divorce. So even though they're kind of sort of technically married, Mary, Mary is going to continue to live at home with her family for another year. And a year later, Joseph's going to come by, he's going to pick up Mary, and he's going to have this ceremonial march back to his house where they'll consummate the marriage and at that point be officially husband and wife, totally married. So now let's shift our views a little bit to Joseph. And her husband Joseph, being a just man and unwilling to put her to shame, resolved to divorce her quietly. But as he considered these things, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream, saying, Joseph, son of David, do not fear to take Mary as your wife, for that which is conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. Like, can you imagine, first of all, that dream? Like, I can't even begin to imagine what that's like.
Very cool.
A couple things we can unpack from this. First is that he did love her, right? Joseph loved Mary. And how do we know that? Because we just talked about it. There was like this contractual engagement. Like, how can you really love someone after that? And Joseph he wanted to do the right thing, right? He wanted to divorce her quietly, right? And that's how we know, because the cultural norm at the time would have actually been to take old Mary here, take her out by the city gate and stone her to death. And that was normal. But Joseph, because he loved her, right, didn't want to do that. Instead, he wanted to divorce her quietly. And then this angel comes. Behold, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream, right? Do not fear to take Mary as your wife. And he took his wife. And again, he's going against the cultural norm. Remember, we talked about you take that year waiting period. He's gonna take his wife, right? He's gonna take it. He's not gonna consummate the marriage. We learn later on that he didn't, but he did take his wife. And then old Caesar comes along, old Caesar Augustus and his census. And Joseph also went up from Galilee, from the town of Nazareth to Judea, to the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and lineage of David, to be registered with Mary, his betrothed, who was with child. Now that seems weird off the get-go, right? Like, why? So they're doing a census, so why are you traveling? Because like we just had the census and I just got some piece of paper in the mail and my wife I didn't even fill it out. Megan filled it out. and put it back in the mail, said how many people live here, and we're good. But 2,000 plus years ago, that wasn't the case. You had to go back to your hometown, and Joseph was from Bethlehem, so that's where him and his very pregnant wife were required to go. Now, Nazareth is in the north of Judea, and Bethlehem is in the south, about 6 miles south of Jerusalem, and it would have been about a 3-day journey for them to make the trip. And you know, we like to imagine Joseph and Mary like riding into Bethlehem. They're like this newly married couple, sort of, kinda, and it's just a happy time, right? Like they're just showing up on this camel or this donkey. It's amazing. But that's not really the way they traveled. And especially with Mary being so pregnant, the reality is they were most likely part of a large group, and Mary was being tended to by family and those assigned as midwives to help Mary with her pregnancy and coming birth. So they arrive in Bethlehem, and we're going to pick it up in Luke chapter 2, verses 6 through 7. And while they were there, the time came for her to give birth. And she gave birth to her firstborn son and wrapped him in swaddling cloths and laid him in a manger, because there was no place for them in the inn. The use of the word inn used here actually gives us the wrong context for our Western society. In fact, the word inn in Greek is katalima, and it actually refers to a guest room, not some lodge full of many rooms like we like to think of it. So as I'm editing this, I've realized my pronunciation that I used was totally wrong. It's actually kataluma. A typical village home at the time was designed to house livestock as well. So in the evening, the livestock would come into the lower level of the house, and this offered heat and protection from theft. Okay, so you'd come into the home, and then inside there was typically stairs that would lead up into the living quarters, which is one large room where families lived, ate, and slept. Like that was it. That was the house. But then behind the family living area, or on the roof, depending on the home, it was meant as a guest room, katalima. Now, since there was a census taking place in the town of Bethlehem, which is, again, only a few hundred people, estimated around 300, the town was very full because everybody had to come back. So learning how these homes were designed can actually shed some light on what it means when Jesus was laid in a manger too, because here's the thing. The way those village homes were designed, they had holes in the floor at the end of the living room where mangers rested. That way, if old Betsy woke up in the middle of the night and wanted to chow on some hay, she could do that. And the mangers were either made out of stone or wood, depending on which animal they were for. While the traditional Christmas story often skips over it, like Jesus was a real baby, all right, which means there was a real birth. And this is where your mind's gonna be blown even more, because the most likely outcome for the culture at the time did not involve Jesus being born in, oh my gosh, I can fix this. Good enough. So the most likely outcome for the culture at the time did not involve Jesus ever being born in the barn, as we like to think of it, right? Like down with the animals in the barn, and somehow this is what our nativity scenes now show to be a barn. But what would have much more likely been typical would have been for the women to clear the men out, right? Like shoo them out, because this wasn't 2020 where the men are in the room. And then with the help of a midwife and a few other women, Mary would have given birth in the family living area where they were also staying. Since space was so tight, however, after the birth of Jesus, when they wrapped him in swaddling cloths and placed him in a manger. Okay, so here's Jesus in our manger. This is like a utter fail, by the way. They don't even have him in a manger on this one. It's just like some hay and a blanket. But really the reality is, after Jesus has been wrapped in the swaddling cloth and placed in a manger, it would have been a stone manger at the end of the living room, or a wooden manger that would have been brought to the middle of the family living area where everyone could see Joseph and Mary's new baby boy. And this wasn't to like place him near the animals. It was probably cleaned and fresh hay put in. It's because there was just no space, but they opened up and welcomed them in their home, right? So what we have seen here and what we've come to know is this scene right here, right? What we have seen here in the reality of the situation is not a last-ditch effort to find shelter for Mary to deliver a baby, but instead what we see is an amazing reality of hospitality, where there was no room for Joseph and Mary. Like everything is full, but a family opened up their single living space and made room for Mary to give birth to the Messiah. And in the same region, there were shepherds out in the field, keeping watch over their flock by night. And an angel came to them and said, "For unto you is born this day in the city of David a Savior, who is Christ the Lord." Shepherds, they were seen as some of the poorest and dirtiest people around. So why did God choose to use some of the lowest in class and just the dirtiest, uncleanest people for the birth announcement of Jesus? And there's actually some amazing foreshadowing happening with the shepherds, but we're going to stick to the historical cultural aspect. And shepherds in antiquity were actually some of the best messengers around. Due to their job requirements, they were always awake and interacting with other shepherds. In fact, if you wanted to get a message out, shepherds were one of the best ways to do it. So the shepherds, this guy, they show up. I only got one. I do have, hold on. I got a camel though. I don't know why was he already in the house? Is he part of the I don't think he's part of the shepherd, right? We'll put him over there. And the shepherds returned, glorifying and praising God for all they had heard and seen as it had been told to them. So these guys that are great messengers, right, they're leaving after praising Jesus, and they're praising him, and they're telling everybody, and they're going back to their fields and they're telling other shepherds.
Oh, hey, what's up, bro? Yeah, did you hear? Yeah. No. We actually got to go see him in person. Like, by far, best day of my life. Yeah, all right, I gotta go too. All right, later.
It's interesting how the first people to really worship Jesus as the Messiah were outcasts. They were the lowest of the low. They often couldn't even visit the temple for weeks at a time due to being unclean. But then the story goes on from talking about these poor, unclean shepherds to the wise men. Now, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem. We'll just put these guys over here. The shepherd, he's gone. He left. Right? They weren't there at the same time. Unlike how the story's told, the wise men did not see a star and show up the next day to worship Jesus. They were from the east and had a serious journey ahead of them. So while no one actually knows the time, but it's expected that Jesus would have been between 1 to 2 years old when the wise men showed up, which is why later in Matthew, Herod killed all the children 2 and under. So this right here never happened. The wise men directly contrast the shepherds in that they could often be found among the king's entourage. So they're not poor and unclean. In fact, you may have heard of them, referred to as magi, and that's because wise men actually translates from magi, who were specialists in astronomy. So think of them as Near East's horoscope readers who often advised kings with their insights derived from the stars. So interesting, isn't it, that they followed a star to the birth of Jesus, and then they arrived. Matthew 2:11, and going into the house, they saw the child with Mary his mother, and they fell down and worshipped him. Then, opening their treasures, they offered him gifts, gold and frankincense and myrrh. Now notice in 2:11 it says 3 wise men fell down and worshipped him. Oh wait, no, it doesn't say that. And this is another common misconception that we've added to the story. And I have no idea where the 3 came from. I would just assume it's probably because there's 3 gifts, and somehow we've decided that each wise man brought a gift. But then why these gifts? And no one really knows for certain. At the time, gold represented kings and gods. So the offering of gold speaks to Jesus' role as king of the Jews, both a king and a god. Now, incense was used for many things, but it could be seen as representing the fragrance of his life, and myrrh, while also used for many things, was used for embalming, representing his death. And it's also believed that these are the gifts that would have actually sustained the family financially when they were forced to pick up and flee to Egypt. So with this information on shepherds and wise men, you can step back and reflect on this idea for a minute, because the story shows the lowest and poorest coming to worship Jesus, while also the rich and educated. One group, the shepherds, are Jews, and the other, the wise men, were Gentiles. And right from the start, we see that all are called to worship and believe in Jesus, both Jew and Gentile. So both the well-off and the poor. We started this off by talking about how the Christmas story has been treated like a fairy tale, right? But taken out of its cultural context to fit our own ideas. And the reality is that it's better than a fairy tale, and with the real information, it's even more amazing and holds even more value for us. So click this up here to see other videos on this channel. Otherwise, thanks for watching, and Merry Christmas.